No pressure.
No pressure
Hello.
at all. It's just live, Remy. You'll survive.
Devoted listener.
Okie dokie. Do you want to count yourself down, or do you want us to do it?
You.
Okay, we got 3, 2, 1.
This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story once a week. I'm Rami.
I'm Anais.
I'm Gerald.
And I'm Maya. And as you can see if you're watching live, we have Rami back again. But instead of being a guest co-host, he is now our new co-host. So welcome to the show, Rami. We're really excited to have you.
I'm excited to be joining, and I'm honored to be here.
Well, I think you're going to be a great addition to the podcast. You know, you really balance our ideas and our thoughts out really well. And quite frankly, we needed another guy so that Gerald doesn't feel so alone and bullied.
Actually, Maya, before you joined the call, Gerald and Rami were having a little bromance that I ruined.
Ah,
A bromance?
Mm-hmm.
you aren't supposed to be listening.
Were they talking about fishing or something?
I joined the call and they just sort of like disperse.
Oh, so they were talking about us. That's what you're really saying. So before we get started on this show, on this episode, I should probably let you guys know, depending on how this particular story goes, it may have some potty mouth. The story does have some adult situations, so it's probably going to lean in that direction.
Okay, and if you haven't read Black Box by Jennifer Egan and don't want to be spoiled, pause the podcast, read the story, then come back. So the story is told as a series of mental dispatches from a spy in the near future. Each dispatch is no longer than 140 characters because the story was originally written and published as a series of tweets in 2012. In the story, the narrator is an undercover American spy in the Mediterranean under the guise of an innocent consort for rich, powerful criminal men. She refers to other women who exist to please these sort of men as beauties. She is also a volunteer, unpaid, and one of hundreds just like her. Her body is riddled with implanted technology, like a camera in her eye and a recorder in her ear. Armed with these technological advancements, she sets out to record any information about the enemy. All of this information is stored in her body. So first she's with one powerful man, and stuff happens, but the point is she goes to another villa of another powerful man, and there she tries to take a photo of this sketchy map and is discovered by her initial companion, who flees the villa and leaves her behind. Then she's taken in as a concubine for the second, even more powerful man in the villa. At night, she sneaks into his room where he sleeps with his alpha beauty and their baby. The narrator tries to download all of the information from the man's handset into her body, which temporarily debilitates her. She's discovered, attempts to escape, is shot in the right shoulder, and manages to flee the scene and find a hidden speedboat. She speeds out into the sea, presses a distress signal implanted behind her knee, and waits to be rescued. It's imperative that her body be recovered because it's the black box of all the information she has gathered. Without it, her unpaid volunteer service to America was for naught.
Okay, before we get into the story, I'm going to put a notice that Anais can cut out and put at the front of the podcast. This particular episode has sound qualities due to a bunch of construction workers having fun outside our new host window. So please,
Sorry about that.
be nice to us. We're really sorry. We're doing as best we can. Okay, now that's out of the way. I had to say that because that bandsaw, the dude that's sawing, needs to just saw and get it over with.
He's going at it.
So just top level, how did everybody feel about the story? This is our first real experimental, serious experimental fiction story. It is science fiction. We've had science fiction before. I would say it's fairly light science fiction. It's not that far into the future, but it's definitely experimental on a couple different levels and in a way that we haven't really had. I'm just wondering, what did everybody think about it as they read it?
Well,
Gerald, since you're hesitating, and I've been fearing your response ever since I read the story. I read the first paragraph. I thought, oh, Gerald's going to hate this.
I hated it. and then I loved it.
Wow!
Really,
Surprise!
I thought it would. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. It was. There were sort of issues which we'll come on to, but basically, really got into it. Very good.
Wow! Now that I was not expecting, Gerald. We are so going to dig into that because there's some stuff in the story that that happened in the last story that you said made you hate stories. And I'm like, How about the other two? Remy and Anais, how'd you guys feel?
I liked it. I thought it was good. I had some issues too, especially like the way it's presented and stuff, but overall I liked it, yeah.
And Anais?
Yeah, I liked it overall as well, especially on the second read-through. And yeah, there's issues that we should get into, and there's just a lot of stuff that I got out of it that I'm excited to chew on.
So that was unexpected. We have 4 hosts, and we all liked it. That's deep. That's pretty deep. I was not expecting that at all. One of the things that struck me in the beginning, when I read it, I hadn't done any research on the story. I just knew it was a story with tweets. I didn't know anything about the story, and I didn't know anything about the author. Did any of you guys do any research before you started reading, or did you go into it totally blind?
Totally blind.
Anais, you probably did some studying because you do that, huh?
Yeah, I always do study. I did studying after the first read-through, before the second, but I also had already heard of Jennifer Egan. Her name comes up a lot. She has that book, the Goon Squad one. Here Comes the Goon Squad or something like that, which got a lot of praise. That's been on my reading list like for years. But yeah, so I kind of knew a little bit like what she's all about, what she tends to focus on, and this story, after I did my research, tends to be in the vein of everything that she tends to write about.
So it'll be fun to see how our perception's different from yours, because I literally went into it completely cold. And until, I would say, the first third of the story, I didn't realize it was science fiction at all. And I was almost wondering if it was like some, like, Aristotle version of like a discourse on what it is to be a beautiful woman or try to be a beautiful woman in society. And then it did like this flip thing that I really enjoyed. It kept me really sucked in all the way up until like the beginning of like the last third of it. There was a part in there where I really had to struggle to stay with it for a minute. But I found it really interesting on multiple levels. So obviously there's this top level of the story of the spy, but then there's this whole idea of her body being the black box and the things that she goes through in order to do her job, like the constant reminding of herself that she's not a prostitute, the constant like dissociation in order to be able to deal with the physical aspects of being a female spy that has to do what she has to do to get the information she needs. I found that really, really interesting and very true. Like, it just felt very true to what that experience would be like.
Okay, so maybe I'm digging in too quick, but it's like the one thing that I kept obsessing with as I read it is, how do you guys feel about the fact that she's an unpaid volunteer spy?
1 second. I'm just going to wait for Remy's little experiment pause for a moment. I actually think it'll be easier if every time that happens, we all kind of get a little quiet so that it's isolated. It'll be easier to chop out. Because if Remy's speaking over the top of it, it's going to be hell to chop out. So if we say something and you're going to like say something, Remy, just like put up a hand motion or something and don't talk until it's done doing what it's going to do. Okay, now that that's out of the way, because we can talk. I felt like it was important because it was the one thing that she was able to hold on to as she's having sex with this man that she doesn't want to be sleeping with, and he's dangerous. And if she was getting paid, it's a different dynamic. I think there would be a feeling of whoring yourself out that she can avoid by having that to hang on to. She chose to be there. She's not even getting paid because she's a volunteer and she is giving herself for a higher cause. I think that is the thing that gives her her strength so that she can do her job. How about you, Gerald?
Yeah, I think I just sort of accepted that part because I don't know why I didn't question it, but I didn't question it. I just thought it's the way that America has developed its using these unpaid volunteers because they're more likely. I thought that the story made it so that they were more likely to be able to do their job because they weren't paid. They weren't they weren't on in the employ of the government. That's it. Just sort of, I don't know. It didn't question it at all. I don't know why.
How about you, Remy?
Yeah, okay. So it was something that was repeatedly brought up within the story. So I think from the character's viewpoint, it was something, I guess, that was on the back of her mind. But I think maybe it's like from like the government standpoint. Hold on. All right, guy.
And then it comes back, man.
It's a long piece of wood he's cutting right there.
You've got to be kidding me.
Okay. Maybe let me go outside and help him. I'll be back.
I think he needs help.
Be like, hey, dude, can you just chill for an hour?
From the government standpoint, maybe they intentionally don't pay people. Oh, jeez.
Just give up. Just say what you're gonna say. It's done.
Maybe
It's
from the government standpoint, maybe they intentionally don't pay people because like the things that they're asked to do are so it's like such big things to ask people to do that like no amount of money I would think would be worth it. So that at some point they're like, oh, this isn't even worth the money, and quit. But I would hope and expect that after they complete their assignments, they're given some sort of like compensation packages or like benefits or something of that sort.
Well, they've got counseling. They have to go specifically to programs counseling.
Wow.
No taxes for the rest of your life or something.
You know what it reminds me of is the reasoning why they got rid of the draft and they went to an all-volunteer army in the U.S. There was this idea that when you had the draft, you had a bunch of soldiers that didn't want to be there, but if you made it volunteer, then people would go because they felt like they believed in the cause. Even though our army is paid, I think there's some of that kind of dynamic at play here, where by being volunteer, she's more extremist, she's more willing to like go the extra mile.
I honestly, this is probably me being very...
You're like, pay the woman.
Yeah, I'm very cynical and sort of jaded. I think she's being played because she's not being paid, but the engineers who made all those doohickeys and installed them in her, they're being paid. The guys coming in the helicopter to rescue her, probably also being paid. I think there's this... The world...
You're guessing. You're assuming.
Yeah, but there's no reason not to assume that because... So there's that line about how... So like there's that... The other thing that she brings up a lot is the difference between individualism and narcissism and collectivism. Except her father's a movie star, her husband's a hero. They're all individually big, right? But she is the one who has to sort of just accept that is not okay. That is narcissism. She's supposed to think about the collective, just to be one star in a tapestry of many, many stars, which she keeps coming back to. She doesn't get paid, and it's just like, how convenient. Like, all these other dudes.
So you're layering this with a little Handmaid's Tale, is what I'm hearing.
I mean, yeah, maybe not quite as strong as that, but it's just like, it's one of those things where it's like, she is in a position where she doesn't have much power. I mean, even at the end of the story, the way the last two tweets kind of give you a sense that they're not rescuing her because they care about her value as a person. They're rescuing her because of the black box. When the helicopter's coming and she sees it coming and she's talking about how whether or not there's people in the helicopter, she says, it may be hard to believe that there are human beings inside it. You won't know for sure until you see them crouching above you, their faces taut with hope, ready to jump. Like, there's this eagerness, not about her, but about this information. Like, she's commodified by the rich, powerful criminal men and commodified also by her own government that set her out there. She isn't even worth a salary.
Now, what you're saying, I agree with. I don't actually think it has anything to do with the money, but remember in the beginning when I said, as I was reading it, before I realized it was science fiction, I felt like it was some sort of dialectical, like, discourse on what it is to be female. And that's why, because there was this whole dehumanizing aspect of, in order to get close to the man, in order to get close enough to get the information, you have to be seen and not seen. You have to smile but not smile. You have to hide and become just a blank beauty. And that's something that I definitely recognize in everyday life, and it was very powerful as far as a feminist theme. And I see that in what you're saying, Anais.
Yeah, because I was going to add that what you were just saying right now, it's kind of like the tweets. If you were to just take out the tweets, that's a guide on how to gather information and survive on the sly. It almost reads like some like 1950s playbook on like managing your husband and surviving.
I wouldn't even say 1950s. I'm saying Cosmo last week.
Yeah, you know, like it's the exact same kind of tactic. Like if he leaves your company twice, don't push it because you don't want him to snap. But you know, it's just really, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
But don't you think that the author is just taking the idea of the of the suicide bombers to applying that to an American standpoint? So they're all volunteers. They're so charged up with the moral job that they're doing. They don't even think about that you know that they're going to kill themselves. So
that's exactly what I thought, Gerald.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's the same with her. She's so driven to do the job that there's no point in paying her, because it's not a job. It's her belief. It's her, you know, it's what she wants to do.
It's her mission.
Yeah, that's the word.
You know, and maybe that's because I'm in the middle of listening to Che again. I'm gonna get through that audiobook one way or another, but I'm listening to it, and there's so many real life examples of people volunteering to do something for free that the paid people wouldn't do. So you're talking about an army. Everyone, all the high brass, they're all getting paid, but who's the suicide bomber? Who's the one that's doing like the crazy mission? They're not getting paid because they're not supposed to exist. Everything has to be under the table. Everything has to be hidden. You know, that's one of the reasons why they don't get paid, is because that's a paper trail. You know, you have spies that don't get paid until decade after the fact when they get compensated, because you can't have that kind of paper trail. And so I think maybe that might be coloring my perceptions of that particular part of the story.
Well, I think it's right. I think to me that's what drew from it.
I think it can be a mixture of the two. They can be playing on sort of, you know, her radicalism, the jingoism that, you know, that she's so patriotic. They can be playing on that to their benefit, because you know, the spy aspect of it hits a lot of like the spy thriller sci-fi tropes. You've got like,
oh yeah, it was great.
Yeah, like you're hitting all these tropes, except the powerful man isn't the target. He's the designated mate. Like that's a very purposefully chosen phrase that keeps harkening back to this, like,
you know, as an ex-stripper, I just kept thinking escort service. The number one spy escort service. Just full of all these gorgeous women. They just like send them out to all these powerful men. Poor Remy. Remy's like, hey, it's quiet. Now you can talk.
I'm just thinking everything you're saying and not letting this guy hold me back. Don't think that. But yeah, I guess like when you're talking about like rich, powerful men, like women are a sign of power as well. So it's just like something you collect, like cars, like anything else. So I guess maybe like that's, you know, something that they use to, you know, status symbol or to compare themselves to other people and so forth.
Yeah, I would also say that a really common dynamic because I've had friends that were in relationships that were not traditional U.S. relationships, and I have been a stripper in my past, and there's this idea of the woman is being taken advantage of, the woman is the victim, and when really the guy is. So because he doesn't see her as anything, because she doesn't have an identity, because she quote-unquote doesn't matter, she has access to all the things that are going to bring him down. So she actually has the power in that situation. And maybe this is just my own feminist fantasy, but I see that a lot in these kinds of stories where it's, you know, you see the person that's weak is actually the one with the power, and that's how I see her in this situation.
Well, here's a question, and I know we kind of had like a debate with the last story I participated in with.
We always have a debate when you're on. That's why you're here.
Yeah. Okay. No, where do you think this designated mate is from?
Oh, that's good. That's good, because that just digs into all of that. You don't even want to say it because you just feel like such a racist American bitch, right? You're just like, big white house. There's like no vegetation. It's near the water. It's near the Mediterranean. You're just like, okay, this is like maybe a little too stereotypical. Good call.
I got European out of it, but I don't know what.
I'm gonna say Greek. I'm gonna say Greek just because
specific country too. Okay.
Well, the guys are terrorists. That's the information she's looking to get, isn't it? She's working for anti-terrorists. So yeah.
Everyone's really uncomfortable now all of a sudden. Anais didn't even say anything.
Well, I'm just letting you guys go for it. I mean, I think the author purposefully doesn't blame any ethnicity or creed, but she's playing on modern day fears. She is playing on that current of Islamophobia that is out there to make her message come across. But I don't think at no point is she saying that, do you feel like this is a worthwhile cause, which I think is important. Like, as you're reading what the spy is doing, at least for me, at no point I'm like, this is totally worth it, setting out these hundreds of women to like prostitute themselves for information. So I think even if she is playing into the current climate of what's happening, in
the
politics
judgment is lacking.
Yeah, like she's not coming down hard. I don't think she's,
One of the things that I thought was that we don't actually know if America is the good guy. Now, we may all assume that, but as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, they're doing all this, they've got all this technology, who knows what America is 60, 70, 100 years from now, and maybe the quote-unquote terrorist isn't. Maybe it's a high-ranking official from a neighboring state or something. And so that was something that I actually appreciated, because usually in stories where they're talking about terrorists or whatever, it's really obvious who the good guy is. And in this story, I felt like that question wasn't even really addressed.
But I wouldn't say that this leaves it open for you to think that the enemy is the good guy either. I think it's just sort of like everyone's bad. Like, it's just like everyone.
Yeah, I'm not saying that.
Every country
it's deliberately ambiguous. What were you saying?
Every country looks out for its own best interests. Every country has spies in other countries. It's just like the nature of the game.
Yeah, and what I meant by leaving it open is by not explicitly saying that it's the good guy or the bad guy, your own internal biases are free to take over, and you're also free to deliberately look at those biases without having the story get in the way. And that's something I appreciated.
And the bad guy, who you think the terrorist that she's spying on is, that's going to change depending on when you're reading it. Because if we go back in time and give this to Cold War era Americans, they're going to be like, it's the Russians, Oh,
totally.
So that's another reason to keep it open-ended. The only reason why we're here squirming is because we're living in 2015.
Yeah. And well, also because of the way the home was described, I think it was deliberately nudged in that direction. And yeah, it did make me uncomfortable, but I like we've talked about before, I like stories that make me uncomfortable, and the story definitely made me seriously uncomfortable. Gerald, Mr. I don't like stories that make me feel uncomfortable.
That's a really good explanation.
I thought so. So, tell me, how did you get past the fact that this story was so uncomfortable and still come to like it?
Because I didn't feel at all uncomfortable. Well,
I'm sorry. Wow.
Yeah.
You're just full of surprises today, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. There you go. You think you know someone, and then... No,
I've
because
seen you get uncomfortable with a lot lesser stuff, Well,
there are specific topics which make me feel very uncomfortable. But this is a spy thriller, and it's
and you're fine with girls prostituting themselves for information in a spy thriller.
Sure, I was brought up on James Bond, so it's that sort of thing. It's a spy thriller. It's set 15 or 20 years in advance of today. So she's got some pretty good gizmos.
Yeah.
I want some of those gizmos.
Yeah.
To me, it felt like a scene out of Total Recall. If you've seen that movie, or even
Yeah.
that one.
That's
There's
true.
definitely a nudge to a lot of those types of movies. Like I totally saw the James Bond. There was so much James Bond in here, but you're right. Like when she was getting the information and the data, I totally was like Total Recall.
Mm.
Although I remember I got a little bit mad at her when she's like, oh, he's totally looking at his handset. Let me just set off this flash. I'm like, girl, what an
I know.
unnecessary risk. And then the handset next to the bed. I'm like, buy your time. Like, just taking these.
Yeah, that
huge
was
risks.
stupid. That was stupid.
Yeah.
That was bordering on the too stupid to live trope. You know, you can't have a character doing stuff that makes them too stupid to live. And it bordered on it, but she brought it right back. And if she hadn't, she would have lost me because I would have been like, oh, I don't care anymore. And actually, I think that's the point where I actually did have problems. Right before that, right around in that section, right before that, I found myself getting a little bit lost. Not lost as comprehension, but lost as far as attention. Like, I was really into the story for a really, really long time. I just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then all of a sudden, I found myself wanting to come out of it. And at first, I thought it was the writing, but then I realized that, you know, the idea of long sentences in a book or a novel has slow tension, and short sentences have high tension. And because of the structure of the story, there was so much tension, and the story went on for so long that I needed to breathe. I literally needed to breathe just to release some tension so that I would have room to take on more freaking tension. And there were a couple places where I did find myself stopping and breathing, and I almost was like gasping because I wanted to get back to the story, but I needed a freaking break.
It wears on you, that structure, when it's going on for that long. So I didn't realize, I think I want to mention this, that it's meant to be like tweets. Like, is that like the information?
Yeah.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah, each one was a tweet. It originally was released by the New York Times that way. She wrote it as a series of tweets, but she was expecting it to just be published in one block. And then the New York Times actually, when they released the story, they released it as a series of tweets. At the same time, they put it up on the website. And I think it was like the first major work that was done that way. There have been a couple people that have fiddled with it since. And I think as far as the podcast, we've had quote-unquote experimental fiction before, but it didn't actually feel experimental. This felt really fresh and new. And that I think that brings up the question that I wrote on my piece of paper was, do you think it works as a tweeted story? And if so, why?
I think so. I think there's something we haven't really mentioned is the writing in the second person. Although she's sort of, so it's written in the second person, but
which again is very rare.
Which is very rare. Which is one of the things that sort of put me off at first. But then it makes sense. And when you read afterwards that she's meant to, you sort of get the feeling that she's internally narrating. It all sort of fits in. So I don't know. I didn't feel at any time that I was rushed, that I had too much tension. I read it straight through. Very happy with it. Did the research like Anais did to find out a little bit more about it, and then read it again. And it just sort of flowed for me.
How about you, Anais? Because you were shaking your head, and I love debate.
Yeah, so I didn't hate that it was a series of tweets, but I thought there was some serious drawbacks to doing it that way. So so on the plus side, I like that it reads as a bunch of missives, which is great for a spy thriller. You're getting this, and like, because remember in the story she talks about how she's recording in her own brain with technology what she's learning so that people who come after her, unpaid women spies that come after her, can copy it. So things like that. You're reading her like tutorial on how to. So that was really effective. But then because every sentence is like standing alone, it gives that sentence way too much importance. All of a sudden you're on a new paragraph and you're reading, cold fish is unappealing, even when served in good lemon sauce. And I'm like, okay, number one, you're wrong. Ceviche is amazing.
Sounds like a Zen koan.
Yeah, yes, exactly. It's like, okay, and second of all,
That's what I loved.
like, I'm just like, okay, great. I'm glad we stopped for that. That was a great detour. Because, every paragraph break, it's that pause where you're like, there's a shift here, and that was the shift, So I think that I had some moments where I was like, thumbs up, like a sarcastic thumbs up. But or there were other times where especially like, for example, before when I read the ending of the story, that was 2 separate tweets. That if it would have been one paragraph, would have conveyed a message a bit more powerfully. Separating it out kind of disjoints the point or the thought, and that happens in a few places. Where it's like, if these tweets were the same paragraph, I get more out of it.
It's sort of, a lot of it reminded me of a prose poem.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, it's got that sort of rhythm to it, which which I was quite happy with.
Complete with the numbered sections. I was having visions of like the Dhammapada, but then I was also a little bit of, oh gosh, some of the old works that are poems, but they're stories and they're divided up into sections, and it definitely had a little bit of that hint to me, going down the 7 levels of hell or whatever. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh wow, there's like so many nods, and in some ways, is it a short story or is it a poem? Like, I started having a little bit of that question until the end, when it got a lot more plotted and there was a lot more action. Until that portion, I was leaning more towards the poetry side of things. How about Rami? How did you feel about whether or not it worked as a series of tweets?
Yeah, I think the intention is to try to immerse the reader in that sort of environment. But the downside, it takes an unnecessary emotional toll. And as Anais stated, it makes it a little disjointed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting that you said that, Anais, that you said it gave unimportant sections more importance, because read on their own, some of those unimportant sections were quite beautiful as poetry. And I think if it had been written more conventionally, we would have just glossed over those statements as background noise. And so the very thing that you felt didn't worked extra well for me. So I think that's really interesting that we're like on opposite sides for that.
It worked for me on a meta level. Like, if I step away from the story, right?
It works for you when you're getting all like literary and like.
Well, like when you see her as like, I know this is going to be very millennial of me to say, but like there's a little bit of a trolling aspect happening here, because let's be serious. So in the story, there's this theme where it's like, oh, we need to shed our narcissistic ways of the past, while this whole thing is being told in tweets, which is just like as narcissistic as it gets. And you're putting really dumb kind of pithy sentences just as important as sentences with a point, right? Because some of them are profound things that should be shared, and other things like cold fish is unappealing. That's the kind of stuff that people do tweet. That's part of the Twitter narcissism, right? So then, like, from this kind of ironic level, it's hilarious that she's doing it that way.
Did anybody else have a couple places where they kind of laughed out loud? I know I did.
Yeah.
Not really, because the way I saw it, okay, so it's in the form of tweets, but obviously we're not to assume that these are actually tweets going out. It's just the way the information is transmitted. And I saw it as maybe like a dictation of her thoughts. And in reality, that is how human beings think. Like, you do have random thoughts or like reactions to your surrounding environments and so forth. So,
which is actually addressed in the story. She says that the missives can be deleted so that if any personal, just random thoughts get in, you can edit them out before the missives get passed on to further agents. So that's even addressed in the story, which I thought was brilliant. I love the whole idea. Like, it took me a little while. Did anybody else wonder if she was going to die? Like, I thought she was dead, and this was what had been downloaded after her death. Until the end, I was like, oh my god, she's alive? Like, I was really tense throughout the entire story. I kept waiting for her to get knocked off. It's like, is this where she's going to die? No. Is this where she's going to die? No, she's still alive. Like, all the way to the end.
Well,
I thought she'd survive, but I thought she might survive in a some sort of meta state or something because it is future. So yeah, the body's in bits down there, but the whole sort of being and the mind is alive somewhere.
I was pulling for her to make it.
Yeah.
You were pulling for her to make it.
Or maybe, now that I've heard, you guys mention all these things, like maybe she survives just long enough for them to download her black box information, because here it is, but then she dies because she should have gone back and deleted the cold fish thing. I'm just saying. She didn't have time to go delete it.
Was the raw download before the editing?
Now that
they mentioned
said
in the
that.
script.
Enough with the cold fish.
There were so many sexual innuendos throughout this story. Black box, cold fish, it's so bad. And there's our explicit rating.
Yeah. Well, okay, since the rating's gone, I'll just do this bit. It was one of the bits where I laughed was should you be perceived as an enemy, prepare to defend yourself at the first sign of physical encroachment. Your new host lunging at you shouting, "What the fuck are you doing?" constitutes physical encroachment.
Yes, I totally lost it. I did. I lost it. That was great.
Yeah, I love bits like that.
Oh my goodness, it was so wonderful, so wonderful.
Also,
and the other one. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was just gonna say.
I was gonna say another one that made me laugh. Anais, you go.
No, go ahead. Mine is just more hilarious.
One of the ones that I thought was really funny was homes of the violent rich have excellent first aid cabinets. It's just really logical, but it's just so dry and just so wryly stated. I was just like, really? That's great.
And useful information.
Yep.
Yeah. No, there was a lot of comments about just observing the way that other people behave, or the alpha beauty compared to the other beauties, all of that, which was really funny and as a standalone tweet would be funny and worth sharing. But there was something else that I picked up on my second read through. So this is one of those stories that on the second read through I felt like I learned so much more, understood so much more, because the first sort of 3 parts were kind of a wash for me on the first read through, because there was that line, if you love someone with dark skin, white skin looks drained of something vital. But at that point, you don't know she's married to a Kenyan. So you're just like, okay, fine, And then when you read it the second time, and that happened for me a lot of times in the second read-through. And I also caught that the first guy, who was lower on the criminal hierarchy, he was slightly less powerful, he was fishing for consent, whereas the second guy did not.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting how the violence kept escalating with the men in terms of power.
Yeah. When I look at this story, for me, the line that really encapsulates it, they say to take a short story or a novel and break it down into one sentence. And the one line to me that really struck me as the backbone of the entire story was a beauty in a diaphanous lavender bathrobe can go anywhere as long as she appears to be delivering herself to someone. And when I read that, I was like, there's your entire thesis for the story, in one tweet, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah, she talked a lot about sort of being incognito, but there at the same time, and nobody paying attention to her, and things you should do so that you could move around like that.
No. The part that lost me, I gotta say, is the idea of her shrieking and flashing her eyes and looking like a monster in order to I can't even say it with a straight face. At that point, it pulled me out of the story a little bit. It was pretty funny.
But when special forces go into a confined space, what do? Flashbangs, bright lights, big sounds, disorientate the people. So I thought, yep, that's exactly what you were doing.
It's like Callie did.
Yeah, it is a bit strange. Yeah.
And it was so perfectly described.
Especially when she introduces it, she capitalizes it. So I thought it was going to be technology. She's going to click her left knuckle and something's going to happen.
No, just look super crazy and flash your eyes and they'll get scared and shocked. I can't talk.
But then
But it
immediately
worked.
go back
It
into the
worked.
hallway and look like a wounded bird, so that the security don't think
Because
you're the
then you're
problem.
invisible again.
I don't think you guys are taking this seriously enough.
No,
Okay.
the way I felt like she was narrating like the action sequences was kind of like, did you see the movie Sherlock Holmes with Robert Downey? When he's like, I guess like you're tapping into the training that you learned and you're sort of like narrating to yourself, okay, so this means this. If this happens, I should do this, like that sort of thing. And it's very like, I guess logical, even though there's chaos happening around you, you're kind of like analyzing it and putting some sort of sense into it.
Totally. So now that we've talked about the things we liked about the story and the parts of the story that were just hysterically funny, let's talk about the parts that we felt didn't work. Who wants to start? I'm assuming let's start with Anais because it seemed like she had the most possibly.
Well, I mean, not really. We sort of already talked about the shortcomings about the structure, the part where I felt like it didn't work, but there were some things that did work about it. There was something else too, the theme where she keeps talking about how like the new heroism is basically being a part of the collective, no longer being narcissistic. I felt like it had that unfinished thought thing for me again. It didn't bother me this time because there were so many other thoughts happening that it's okay if that one wasn't quite finished, but it seemed critical of the narcissism of mostly Americans today, and she specifically points out Americans early on in the story, but in general, internet culture, but without giving you a counterpoint of why her volunteering anonymously among hundreds of women, so why is this better though, this specific example of collectivism? There was,
what's interesting is when you said that, it struck me that when you were speaking about narcissism, you were talking about independent narcissism of the generations, and you tied it to millennials getting constantly bombarded with the idea that they're narcissistic little twits. When I read that, I read it as a hint that America was now a communist nation, that there had been something that happened, and because of the volunteering and the new heroism and the focus on her being part of the collective and giving up for the state, to me it felt like a slight hint that something had happened and that there was a new idea of what it is to be in the world. And there was this whole idea of the fact that Americans were previously known for being so narcissistic and that they were able to use it to their advantage. And that I thought was an unfinished thought for me. I think it could go both ways. I think it's really interesting the way you're reading it.
Yeah, I don't know if I can get on board with the communist angle, just because I feel like what she's playing on, the idea of the state and sacrifice and volunteering, kind of exists today. It's that jingoism, that whole like America's the best, So I feel like you don't need. I'm not saying they couldn't have gone communist. I'm just saying you don't need that to justify the language used, because that language already sort of exists.
Yeah, but we don't use the word collectivism. We don't use that in the U.S. That's not a word that is in our common parlance.
Does she use it? I'm using it, but did she use it?
I'm pretty sure it's in there. I'll have to check, but I'm pretty sure it was in there. Like, I had a sense throughout, and I can't figure out which sentence it was that made me feel that way, but it was definitely a sense that this America is not the America that we know now in some way. And I was constantly trying to figure out what it was that had changed.
It's in the new heroism, the goal is to transcend individual life with its petty pains and loves in favor of the dazzling collective.
Yeah, that's not American thought process.
No, actually, since I'm still kind of in the process of reading 1984, there were like some flashbacks to that society as well. Like that whole mentality, and even in that story, people are spying on each other even, and so yeah, it kind of reminded me of it.
Yeah. So interesting, Gerald.
Nothing really. there was nothing that didn't work for me, to be honest.
You said that in the beginning you weren't completely sold, and then you ended up loving it. What was it in the beginning that bothered you?
Just the construction and the way of writing. It took me. It's just those first few sentences, the first few tweets that I, because they're sort of fairly non-specific. They're
almost philosophical. They're not really a story. They're like philosophical, like poetic thoughts.
Yeah, and I thought that the sort of tweet construct didn't suit those sort of thought processes. So I just thought this is going to be difficult to get on board with these sort of thought processes. But once she was out there doing what she was doing with the super secret things around her body, I was sort of quite happy with that. So. I'm just a kid, really. I'm just a little boy.
But you told us before you like crime thrillers and stuff like that. Like this is
like in his wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Remy, I'm trying so hard. You're making it really difficult for me to like be good.
My weird.
Oh my goodness. So, any final thoughts on this? It seems like we all like got a lot out of it, which I was surprised by. So, yeah. Any final thoughts? Looks like we're ready to rate this puppy. Who wants to go first? Let's start with Remy since he's new.
Okay. I was deciding between a 4 and a 5, but after discussing, I think I'll lean towards a 5. I'll give this one a 5.
Mm-hmm.
Anais?
Yep, it's a 5 from me too.
Really?
Okay. Wow. Gerald?
It's certainly a good solid 5 from me.
And I'm going to give it a 5.5.
Woo!
Yeah, we really like this story. That's surprising. Usually when you end up with 4 people, there's always somebody that doesn't like it. And so if you want to learn more about Remy, we will have his biography on the website this Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
And all the curious listeners.
Yeah, because they'll all want to know about you.
Yeah.
We have some very curious listeners.
And speaking of our listeners, they gave Not From Here by Angela Mitchell 5 Bradberries. So 5 is the number of the day.
That really surprised me. I read, whose comment was that? I read it this morning. I was like, wow, like, they like the story, you know, because that story was a little different. I was surprised.
Yeah. Well, now we're going to choose next week's story, and I'm hosting the game, but before I review, I'm very excited for this game.
Yeah, which means it's all just down. I don't like it when she gets that excited. It's never good news.
No.
We should just name this segment, How Can We Make Maya Look Stupid Today?
As long as they're not trick questions. I hate
they're always trick questions.
Intentionally tries to throw you off, yeah.
Yeah.
Very sneaky.
Never trick questions.
We're all pawns in this game.
Oh, dear. Oh, here we go.
Okay, now that we're all like depressed and want to jump off a bridge, what stories are we submitting for this week? This week I'm throwing Good People by David Foster Wallace into the ring.
I'm picking one. It's called The Necklace by a French guy. His name's spelled Guy, but I think it's pronounced Guy de Maupassant.
I'm throwing in The Piano Tuner by Peter Meinke.
Okay. So, one thing we didn't mention in our discussion, but the narrator, she's a cyborg. And the future is now. We've got some real-life cyborgs. We have some science fiction cyborgs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a description of a cyborg, and you have to tell me if they're from real life or if they're from a work of fiction.
That is awesome, Annie. That is so awesome.
Okay, Rami first.
Okay.
This is a cyborg with vision-enhancing contacts surgically attached to her cornea.
So I answer like real or not real or what?
Basically.
Real. I'll say real.
Not real. It's Molly Millions from William Gibson's Sprawl trilogy. That's the one that has Neuromancer in it. Okay.
Oh, I would have said real too.
Sci-fi. It's because I picked ones. She has other stuff that I was like, that's definitely not real. This cyborg's got everything. So I'm like, okay. Gerald.
You.
This cyborg was born totally colorblind, but now has an electronic eye that sees color and turns it into sound so that he can hear color. Yeah, something like that.
That's got to be real.
It's real. His name is Neil Harbison, and he's a visual artist that works heavily in color. So
That's awesome.
Maya. Cyborg with implants in his skin that remotely control his home.
Not real.
Real. Kevin Warwick from the University of Reading. He's the founder of Project Cyborg and a professor of cybernetics. He's intense.
That's kind of hot.
I know. He's not.
Really?
Sorry, Kevin Warwick, you're very handsome.
Careful where you touch him, though.
All of a sudden,
Oh, the garage
I'm
open.
picturing like the house, like all the shutters going off, the lights. Like, oh, I know what they're doing. Sorry.
Okay, Ravi. After a horrific martial arts duel with his former teacher that ends in third-degree burns, this cyborg is put on life support, robotic legs, and arms.
Not real.
Not real. It's Darth Vader.
That was good. That was good.
Okay, Gerald. After losing a finger in a motorcycle accident, this cyborg decides to replace his finger with a USB hard drive.
That's real.
It is real. Wow, Gerald.
What?
Jeremy
That's
Jalava.
just wow.
His finger's a USB drive.
Yeah.
And what happens when his finger crashes?
Okay, Maya. It's a computer surgically implanted in a deaf human's cranium that lets them hear again.
True.
It's true. It's Michael Korhost. Although now more people are doing that.
Yeah. Isn't that a cochlear implant?
No, this one's
Or something
different. 'Cause
similar. Oh, it goes in.
It's like brain surgery. It's like different. Yeah. Rami. So this cyborg lost both hands during the 1920s in New York during the mob wars, very specific, and the prosthetic hands are controlled by his brain.
Not real. Not real.
It's not real. It's Dr. No from the Bonds. I did the book version,
1920s
which
is too old for that sort of technology.
Yeah.
yeah.
You can do it
but
now.
You can do it now. Yeah. But the movie version, it's a radiation accident. I'm like, that one's even more obviously fake. Okay. So right now we have a tiebreaker between Rami and Gerald.
No, I got one wrong.
Oh.
Oh, did Gerald?
Yeah. Oh, so then Gerald wins? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah,
Because I have
I think
one more
Gerald
for
wins.
tiebreakers. But if I give it to
Now you're
I think
confused.
Gerald's got it.
Well, just
Yeah.
give it to Gerald.
just give it to Gerald. I had one
Gerald.
more. Well,
I would have won, but I'm taking pity on you, Gerald.
Thank you, Maya, because of course I never win, do I?
Oh, just turn that key.
Yeah.
Well, I have one more for a tiebreaker, which we don't need, but I'm going to give it anyway just for funsies. So who wants to do the fun one?
Why don't we all do it and
No.
see who
Okay.
says the answer?
If you know who it is, actually, it's a well-known cyborg, sort of. So it's fictional. So it's a detective cyborg so obsessed with solving crimes, he grafted bionic enhancements to his body.
Inspector Gadget!
Inspector Gadget!
Inspector
Very good.
Gadget!
I don't writing down the description, I'm like, I'm making this really dark and grim.
That was awesome.
Okay,
Good
so Gerald,
quiz.
what are we reading?
Next week we are reading The Piano Tuner by Peter Meinke.
Okay, so everybody please read that story. And in the meantime, did you know that your body is a black box of thoughts that you have on this story? Please share your thoughts on this thrilling sci-fi with us in the comment section at literaryroadhouse.com. And please help others find our show by leaving a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or Spreaker and sharing our podcast with your friends. Until next time, read a good story.
Do, do.